Arizona is running out of water. That's not speculation. That's not alarmism. It's already happening. Yet at the same time, Arizona continues to approve new housing developments, new suburbs, new master-planned communities, many of them in areas where long-term water security is already in doubt. Homes are still being built. Permits are still being approved. Population growth is still encouraged. So that raises a simple question. If the water system is under this much strain, why does Arizona keep growing? Why does the state continue approving developments it may not be able to sustain, not just environmentally, but economically and socially? This video isn't about blaming one person. It isn't about politics in the usual sense. It's about understanding how Arizona's growth model works, why it keeps moving forward even as the limits become obvious, and why slowing it down is far harder than most people realize. Because this didn't happen by accident. Arizona is one of the fastest-growing states in the U.S. For decades, growth has been the state's economic engine. Construction, real estate, tourism, service jobs, tax revenue. New residents mean higher property tax bases, more sales tax, more development fees, more short-term economic activity. Entire local budgets depend on this. Cities don't just like growth. They're often financially structured around it. When a new development is approved, it brings upfront fees, new infrastructure funding, short-term job creation, political wins. The costs, water stress, infrastructure maintenance, long-term scarcity come later, often decades later. And that timing mismatch is critical. Here's where things get misunderstood. The governor doesn't personally approve every housing project. Most approvals happen at city councils, county boards, planning commissions. But the framework they operate under is set at the state level. State law determines how water availability is defined, what counts as assured supply, how far into the future developers must plan, where groundwater rules apply, and where they don't. And Arizona's framework is unusually permissive. In many parts of the state, developers are allowed to pump groundwater with minimal oversight, rely on projections rather than guarantees, build first and solve water problems later. Once developments are approved locally, reversing them becomes legally and politically difficult. The momentum locks in. Arizona often points to its 100-year assured water supply rule as proof of responsibility. On paper, it sounds reassuring, but here's the catch. The rule doesn't mean water is physically present. Water sources are climate-proof, water will remain affordable. Groundwater won't be depleted. It often means projected access, contractual assumptions, legal availability, not hydrological reality. In some areas, groundwater is considered available, even if it's being drawn down faster than it can recharge. That's not sustainability. That's delayed scarcity. And once homes are built, the pressure shifts. Cities must provide water. Residents expect service. Shutting off supply becomes politically impossible, so the system keeps going. Slowing development sounds simple. In reality, it's one of the hardest political moves possible. If a governor aggressively restricts growth, housing prices rise even faster. Supply tightens, voters get angry, builders push back, cities lose revenue. Arizona already faces housing affordability problems, restricting new builds without massive alternative planning risks, worsening homelessness, increased rent pressure, economic slowdown. So leaders are trapped between long-term sustainability, short-term economic stability, and short-term pressures almost always win. Not because leaders are reckless, but because the system rewards continuation. When surface water declines, Arizona leans on groundwater. This is the quiet part of the crisis. Groundwater doesn't disappear overnight. There's no visible countdown, no dramatic empty riverbed in most cities. So it feels safe, but groundwater is finite, and in many rural areas, it's barely regulated. What happens next is predictable. Industrial pumping increases residential wells. Dry up land subsides replacement costs, fall on residents, not developers. This creates a two-tier system. Cities with infrastructure survive longer, rural communities absorb the damage first. From the outside, Arizona still looks functional. That illusion matters. So, why doesn't the governor simply draw a line? because doing so would require rewriting water law, confronting powerful development interests, risking lawsuits, slowing economic growth, accepting short-term political backlash. And even then, it wouldn't fix existing commitments. Millions of people already live here. Entire cities already depend on fragile systems. Growth approvals today are often framed as manageable, future adjustable, someone else's problem later. Once growth is embedded, backing out becomes nearly impossible. So instead of stopping, the state manages decline quietly. To really understand why Arizona keeps approving growth, you have to step away from water for a moment and look at money, because water scarcity alone doesn't stop cities. What stops cities is financial collapse. Most Arizona cities rely heavily on sales tax, property tax, development fees. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Many cities are not financially stable without continued growth. New developments don't just add residents, they temporarily balance budgets. They fund road expansions, police and fire services, municipal bonds, public facilities. But the cost of maintaining that infrastructure doesn't peak immediately. It stretches decades into the future. That creates a dangerous cycle. Cities approve growth to pay for today. Tomorrow's costs are pushed forward. And the only way to cover them later is more growth. This isn't corruption, it's structural dependence. And once a city becomes dependent on expansion, stopping feels like pulling the plug on life support. From the outside, it seems obvious. If water is limited, slow down growth. But from inside the system, slowing down looks terrifying. Slower growth means fewer construction jobs, falling housing supply, rising prices. Political backlash, economic headlines leaders don't want. In fast-growing states, momentum becomes proof of success. Any pause looks like failure. So, leaders face a choice. Manage a slow, abstract risk decades away, or face immediate, visible backlash today. Human systems almost always choose the second option, especially when the consequences of water stress arrive unevenly. Cities feel insulated. Rural areas absorb the early damage, and politically, that matters. Groundwater plays a unique role in this story, not just hydrologically, but psychologically. Groundwater is invisible. There's no shoreline, no reservoir photo, no dramatic empty basin to point to. As long as wells still pump, leaders can say, "We have water," even if aquifers are collapsing, even if land is subsiding, even if recharge rates don't come close to extraction. Groundwater buys time, but it also hides urgency. And the deeper the reliance goes, the harder it becomes to pull back without causing immediate disruption. So, groundwater becomes a political shield, not a solution. Once a development is approved, stopping it is extraordinarily difficult. Not because leaders don't care, but because approval creates legal obligation. Developers invest millions, land changes hands, infrastructure plans lock in. If approvals are revoked, lawsuits follow, compensation, claims explode, courts get involved, timelines stretch for years. That risk alone discourages intervention. So instead of stopping projects outright, states quietly adjust language. They refine definitions. They add future conditions. But the approvals continue, and each approval narrows the room to maneuver. Most people experience water scarcity as an inconvenience, not a threat. Restrictions feel manageable. Price increases feel annoying. Messaging stays calm. That's intentional. No state wants panic. No city wants headlines about unsustainability. Confidence is a resource, and leaders protect it. As long as confidence remains, people keep moving and developers keep building, lenders keep financing, insurance stays available. The real danger isn't running out of water. It's losing confidence before adaptation is ready. And that's why messaging stays measured. When scarcity intensifies, it doesn't hit everyone equally. Affluent areas adapt. They pay more, they drill deeper, they secure contracts. Lower-income communities don't have those buffers. Rural towns lose wells. Farmers fall out of production. Households face impossible replacement costs. This isn't hypothetical. It's already happening. And once those patterns emerge, they tend to harden. Water scarcity becomes less about survival and more about access. Technology helps. Efficiency helps, recycling helps, but none of them change the underlying math. You can stretch supply, you can smooth peaks, you can reduce waste, you cannot create new water at scale. Desalination, imports, and mega projects all face cost barriers, energy constraints, political resistance, decades-long timelines, which means they can't solve the immediate pressure of continued growth. Engineering buys time. It doesn't erase limits. Systems don't fail when resources disappear. They fail when expectations collapse, when buyers hesitate, when insurers retreat, when lenders reassess risk, when migration slows quietly. There's no headline, no announcement, just a gradual shift. Growth doesn't stop. It stalls, then drifts elsewhere. By the time it's obvious, the approvals are already history. When systems fail, they rarely collapse all at once. Instead, you see permanent watering restrictions, rising utility bills, declining agricultural output, infrastructure strain, insurance retreat, uneven livability. Growth doesn't halt dramatically. It slows, then fragments, then shifts elsewhere. Cities don't vanish, they hollow out. And by the time it's obvious, the approvals have already happened. And here's the thing. Arizona isn't some weird exception. What's happening here is the result of decisions that were made years ago, sometimes decades ago, all stacking on top of each other. Cities expanding into deserts, developments approved without a long-term water plan, entire regions betting that future technology, future rain, or future policy will somehow fix problems that already exist. And Arizona just happens to be where all of that pressure is starting to show first. Because once you look past the sunshine and the growth headlines, you start to notice cracks in water supply, in infrastructure, in livability that don't really get talked about until they're impossible to ignore. Over the next few videos, I'm digging into why Arizona keeps growing despite those limits, how the Colorado River crisis is accelerating faster than people expected, and why this isn't just a local issue anymore. It's something that affects the entire Southwest, and eventually the rest of the country. So if this video made you stop and think, even a little, you're going to want to stick around. Because Arizona isn't just growing, it's becoming a warning.